The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome to our webinar. I'm going to give it maybe one more minute for some remaining attendees to join. And in the meantime, I wanted to point out we're sharing our free COVID-19 dashboard site information here on the screen. Feel free to check it out. This is a demonstration site that includes our TX360 tool and is monitoring many different aspects of COVID-19 right now. So you just need to use the link, enter your email address, and then the password is here on the screen. So with that, I'm going to just allow for maybe one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Great. Well, welcome everyone. We're glad you're here. My name is Julie Morse, and I am the Vice President of Customer Success at Swan Island Networks. I will be sharing this morning's webinar with my colleague, Ariel Goldfarb, and she'll be presenting this morning as well. Ariel is an intelligence analyst on our team here at Swan Island. And I already pointed out the demo dashboard login information here. For those of you that are just joining us, feel free to check it out now or after the webinar. This contains demonstration dashboards on our TX360 platform that are monitoring many aspects of the COVID-19 crisis. So this morning, this is the third in a series of webinars on topics that our team has identified and researched to help organizations such as yourself address the threats of today's world. Today, we will focus on a very pertinent topic, one that's on the top of everyone's minds today, and that is the recovery and reopening businesses from the COVID-19 outbreak. We will also highlight the utility of our TX360 software platform in monitoring these key issues. If you do have questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat window on the right side of the GoToMeeting screen, and we will definitely do our best to answer them in the Q&A period at the end of the session. So this morning's agenda, we'll begin today's webinar with an overview of the topic, and that is the phased reopening of the U.S. We'll take a look at the big picture across the country, guidelines, and the current status. Next, we'll recognize some of the challenges of reopening and explore some unique considerations for a couple of industry-specific use cases. We'll look at lessons learned from around the world to provide a glimpse of hope and also help inform decision-making going forward. And then finally, we'll review strategies to successfully manage and mitigate the threats and disruptions of the coming months, despite the added impacts of COVID-19. And we'll do this by taking a look at our software platform, TX360. And of course, finally, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ariel, who's going to walk us through the first part of the presentation.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you everybody for joining us today as we attempt to unravel this very complex situation. Taking steps to reopen the economy after months of lockdown seems like an inevitable next step, but there are lots of questions surrounding this reopening and how to best be prepared for it amid the varied guidelines. I'll provide you with a brief overview of the current situation in the United States as a starting point in our discussion. All the data that you'll see presented today has been compiled from research over the past several weeks, but it is important to note that this is a topic that is very rapidly changing from day to day and even from hour to hour. There's a great deal of complexities associated with reopening across the United States, with a combination of federal, state, and local guidelines to be followed in order to ensure the safest methods are adhered to. There have been a number of regional pacts entered by governors in an effort to coordinate some of these reopening of the state economies in a manner that is most safe. The 3 leading cooperative deals have included the Western states made up of Oregon, Washington, and California, the Midwestern states ranging from Wisconsin to Kentucky, and the Eastern states from New York to Massachusetts. With that being said, there are already 47 states, in addition to DC, who have made the decision not to reopen schools for the remainder of the academic year, despite steps to reopen the economies more broadly. And as we'll touch upon in the remainder of this webinar, this of course poses problems to businesses and to employees returning to work as their children are going to be staying home. On a federal level, the Trump administration has created a set of guidelines encouraged to be met prior to any steps to reopen the economy. You can see the list of these requirements here on the left, and they include a downward trajectory in the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in any 14-day period, as well as a downward trajectory in the number of COVID-19-like cases reported in any 14-day period. Once these requirements are met, the federal government asserts that states can then begin working towards reopening in 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 includes a continuation of the social distancing protocols and a generally hesitant move towards easing restrictions, with gatherings still being limited to no more than 10 people and continued closures of most businesses. Each phase should see no rebound in confirmed cases before moving on to the next. Phase 2 and 3 begin to be slightly more lenient in their criteria. Phase 2 still encourages maximization of social distancing and the limiting of gatherings to no more than 50 people, but it is during this phase when domestic travel can then resume. Phase 3 envisions an almost complete return to normalcy for most Americans, with a focus on identification and isolation of new infections. With a number of states now taking these steps towards reopening their economy, there has been some debate about whether it is too soon for these steps to be undertaken. The Atlantic's ongoing COVID-19 tracking project has reported that in mid-April, 20% of those tested in the United States were positive for infection. And that exorbitantly high number likely means that testing was being reserved for those with a high probability of having the infection. This hints towards a need to increase testing in order to gain a clearer statistic and ensure that states are ready for reopening. Harvard Global Health Institute estimates that testing across the country should be more than tripled to about 900,000 tests per day in order to confidently begin easing these restrictions. On a slightly brighter note, we can see an increase in testing numbers this week, with around 260,000 tests per day being conducted. And while this still falls below the recommended value, it does adjust the statistics slightly, with the US now hovering around a 10% positive rate. The government does want the positive rate to stay around 10% positive per state before reopening can begin. So this week, 30 states have started to or plan to start reopening their state economies. But over half of those states still fall short in 2 of the federal guidelines for reopening America. These criteria are that there is an increase rather than a decrease in positive test results, and that there has been an increase rather than a decrease in the recorded COVID-19 cases in these states. Additionally, these states do require an increase in testing in order to effectively gauge the number of confirmed cases. So with the inevitability of the reopening, there's no doubt that any steps towards this will come with a set of challenges and difficulties, and we will address some of the primary ones in the slides ahead. The challenges can be represented through a cycle. We're currently finding ourselves facing the coronavirus outbreak, as we're all too familiar with. This in turn has led to a number of closures and social distancing measures. And the widespread closures of businesses has led to an economic hardship, which has been a driving force for states to ease restrictions and to reopen their economies. This in turn has led to the potential to lead to a new outbreak of infection, should these restrictions be eased before meeting the recommended criteria. We're currently finding ourselves in the part of the cycle marked here in red, in between the loosening of restrictions and a possible new outbreak or resurgence. There is somewhat of an urgency to act now before this second outbreak occurs, should it occur, in order to best prepare for a worst case scenario. Hopefully this discussion will allow you to feel slightly better prepared to tackle this potential resurgence. So speaking of this resurgence, that is the first challenge that we will address today when discussing this reopening. Experts have warned that a major challenge in reopening is the possible resurgence of the disease should the reopening occur too soon. There is the added worry that a second wave could coincide with flu season, which would be even more challenging to handle than the current outbreak. A resurgence would also lead to an inevitable second round of economic shutdown, which is another challenge associated with the reopening. We know that the world is currently struggling economically due to the widespread restrictions, and this has been a major push for policymakers to reopen as quickly as possible. But economic experts assert that opening the economy prematurely increases the likelihood of a need to shut it back down once infections reach a certain level, creating multiple open and shut cycles. These experts also speculate that this kind of open and shut cycle would result in a W-shaped recovery, in which a tentative recovery, like the one we're starting to see now, would sink back into a double-dip recession before rebounding finally. With the inevitability of opening at this stage of recovery, there are a number of considerations on how to do so safely. We'll focus on both policy and physical deliberations businesses should consider when reopening. From a policy perspective, businesses should follow federal as well as CDC guidelines for reopening and maintaining social distancing, which includes the creation of a business-specific plan, its implementation, and its maintenance and revision. To keep on top of these regulations and business-wide policy decisions, companies should create a reopening task force charged with managing and implementing the safe reopening. New and unprecedented company policies should also consider what kind of benefits should be included to better prepare for a resurgence, and should tackle questions of sick leave and paid time off for employees. Now, aside from these policy considerations, organizations are also going to have to prepare to implement physical changes to their businesses. This will include limiting the number of customers in store and the number of employees by staggering shifts. Temperature checks or signed waivers of health may also be considered as a policy implemented by employers to track their employee health. Measures will also have to be taken to reconfigure physical business spaces by considering physical barriers such as plexiglass or individualized cubicles, the creation of open passages and shared spaces, and elevator policies or even automation and use of robotic techniques in order to manage an outbreak. Major sanitation procedures will also have to be considered, including the improvement of ventilation and airflow, workspace cleaning and disinfection, personal protective equipment for employees, and public disinfectant materials for customers. While many of these seem like simple steps to take when reopening, there are many that will not be as simple to implement. And some of the challenges you may or may not have considered when discussing the reopening of your business include the navigation of state and local regulation across multiple business branches across the country, as we see them varied from state to state and even city to city. The lack of a sweeping federal regulation in place by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. The high economic cost that's associated with making many of these changes that businesses will have to incur. Some workers may simply not feel safe returning to work, or they may be unable to do so due to their own illnesses or the fact that their children will be out of school and they have no one to care for them. For those employers imposing temperature checks or other monitoring of staff, it will be a key challenge to maintain employee privacy and to record collected data in a manner that is safe. Trying to enforce social distancing guidelines will also probably not be as easy or simple as it sounds, and considerations of repercussions for those not abiding by your guidelines will have to be a consideration. With the previous guidelines for reopening now being discussed, it's interesting to look at how some of the biggest retailers are applying these suggestions. The Home Depot has taken a number of steps towards reopening. They've distributed thermometers to store workers and have requested that temperature checks be done prior to each shift. They've limited the number of customers in their store to 100 in order to help maintain social distancing guidelines. They've canceled large group promotions to avoid drawing a crowd and have closed their stores earlier to allow for disinfecting and restocking. And on a policy level, they've also provided their employees over 65 years of age with 160 hours of paid time off. The Gap is another store that is preparing for its inevitable reopening, and they're currently in the stages of reopening about 800 stores by the end of May. In anticipation for this reopening, they've taken a number of steps. They have closed their fitting rooms and restrooms throughout all of their stores. All returns to stores will be quarantined for a period of at least 24 hours. Plexiglass guards will be installed at cash register to protect the employees. New cleaning routines will be undertaken, and hand sanitizer stations will be placed at front doors as well as at cash registers. They will also reduce the store hours to allow for disinfection and restocking. And they will supply employees with face masks and encourage but not require customers to wear a face covering when shopping. And finally, they'll post signage to remind customers of the social distancing guidelines that are in place in their stores. Moving to a maybe smaller example, but still highly pertinent, Nicky USA is a small meat processing plant based in Portland, Oregon. And with restaurant closures, their business has suddenly put in jeopardy. They had to take quick action to ensure that they'd stay afloat during this very challenging time and to prevent an outbreak like the one that we're seeing at so many large meat processing plants across the country. They took a number of steps to ensure their continued survival, including a move to an online consumer direct sales model rather than selling to restaurants or relying solely on selling to restaurants. They made the difficult decision to cut staff with hopes, of course, of rehiring them at the end of the pandemic. They've diversified the products they sold to include specialty mushrooms, CBD products, and even toilet paper. They've expanded to curbside pickup options with customers popping their trunks upon arrival to avoid any contact. They've mandated temperature checks at entrances and enforced mask wearing amongst employees. And they've increased their cooperation with local farmers and with grocery stores to ensure that their client base has diversified. In 8 weeks of lockdown, the company managed to recoup 40% of its business, and not a single employee had fallen ill, which of course is a great win for the company. The United States was not the first country to undertake reopening measures, and there are lessons, of course, to be learned from those who eased restrictions first. Singapore can provide us with a lesson in preparedness. At the outset of this outbreak, Singapore served as an example in how to keep the curve flattened. Despite its proximity to China, the country undertook massive testing and contact tracing efforts, which allowed the economy to remain open throughout this outbreak. But then in April, the table slightly turned when an unprecedented rise in cases amongst migrant workers in the country suddenly appeared, leaving the government blindsided. By the end of April, the country exceeded 17,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus, which was a large jump from the 600 cases reported at the month's outset. Of the 876 new cases of infection reported on May 10th alone, only 3 were amongst permanent residents, and the rest were amongst migrants. For the United States, of course, this should serve as a reminder that there are populations still largely unaffected by this disease who should not be forgotten when considering whether to open too soon. Hong Kong can provide us with somewhat of a lesson in recovery. Hong Kong's success in surviving multiple waves of the virus provides lessons to other cities around the world looking to relax restrictions. Hong Kong began loosening their restrictions in late February after they saw sort of a flattening of their curve, but was hit with a second wave as students began returning home from abroad. The government there took very aggressive action and very quick action to curb the second imported wave. And this included barring non-residents and implementing strict quarantine and testing measures. Now, after more than 2 weeks without a case of local transmission, life there is returning to normal once again. So we can see that the idea of a resurgence is something that is possible here as well. South Korea and Germany are both cited very widely as being the gold standard on how to sort of flatten the curve of the virus. Both took early action in social distancing measures and aggressive testing, which led to great success in keeping the numbers low. South Korea had only a 2% positive infection rate, and Germany only a 7% positive infection rate, which when compared to the 20% positive rate that we saw in the United States throughout April, or even the 11% positive rate that we're seeing now at the start of May, those are very good numbers. Germany was economically prepared and is a proponent of the balanced budget policy, which allowed it to provide widespread economic aid and keep unemployment down. And South Korea applied lessons learned from the MERS outbreak in 2015. And despite its population being less than 1/6 of the United States' population, they tested over 20,000 people per day. Some other policies implemented in South Korea are likely to be less applicable in the United States, including several policies of tracking sick individuals using bracelets and other possibly privacy infringing policies. And it is worthwhile to note that South Korea is currently experiencing a cluster of cases and sort of a resurgence in certain hotspots, which have stemmed as the result of loosening the coronavirus restrictions. The hotspot has then led to a brand new cycle of regulations there in the areas that have been hardest hit, and should serve as a poignant reminder of the need to maintain a level of preparedness. So having unraveled some of these challenges that businesses are currently facing, I'll give it back to Julie, who will lead us in a discussion on steps your business can take to prepare for the inevitable and how situational awareness tools can be vital in this preparation.
Thank you, Ariel. And I really enjoy seeing those examples of the ways companies are already navigating the challenge, as well as the different places around the world that have successfully made it to this next stage. So with that, we're going to pivot over to some of the tools and resources side of things. Just to kind of set the stage here on the threat landscape. So on any given day, this is the landscape of threats that a global corporation may be facing. And usually, one or two at a time, sometimes three, but pretty small scale. Today, of course, this global pandemic has overtaken all things for at least 8 weeks now. And we now face a stack of these all at once. So in addition to that, we're seeing various flare-ups of unrest, protests that are related to the COVID-19 changes, and then other crime, terrorism, and cybercrime taking advantage of the situation. So we talk about situational awareness as a means to anticipate, mobilize, and respond to threats in order to safeguard lives, property, maintain business continuity, and reputation. And in fact, George Washington did as well. He recognized this in the very early days when he dedicated part of his own budget to intel gathering. In a crisis, we do want to minimize the time between first detection and our reaction to it, being ready with the information that will allow us to act fast when it counts. It may be important to integrate the situational awareness and threat monitoring with our other response methods. And these may be unique for each organization. So examples of this would be, incident management tools, a unified command system, and mass notification. And of course, very important to communicate clearly across the organization and with customers, partners, supply chain, and even the government. And you'll want to share targeted versions of information to those different groups, depending on the sensitivity level and their relationship. So I wanted to talk through situational awareness across the threat cycle. So we think of this threat cycle in 4 pieces. The first obviously being blue sky days. These are clear, and they allow us plenty of time to plan, think, create, practice, build partnerships. Then moving into gray sky days, this is where we see an identified threat. So that means turning up the threat monitoring, tuning in key sources, and contingency planning. So many of you are in roles, responsibilities that are involved in that all of the time. And by the way, for those of you that are managing all hazards for your organization, this is also where we're at right now with natural disaster season. So looking ahead, wildfire season has kind of ramped up in the last week or two. We're seeing those pop up a bit. Tornadoes have come through a couple weeks within the last couple of months. And then hurricane season is definitely on the horizon. So these gray sky days have known threats ahead, plans in place, possibly annual or seasonal plans, and assigned roles within the organization. Now the black sky days, this is where we are right now with COVID-19. right in the middle of it, reacting, responding, adapting, uncovering the cascading effects that were unanticipated, and dealing with that on a daily basis. The good news is that we're seeing signs of the new dawn from COVID-19. We're talking today about how states are reopening and the reversals are starting. So we're really preparing to walk through that final exit stage there. So I wanted to give a quick overview of our platform, TX360. It's our tool for global situational awareness and threat monitoring, and it's composed of 4 key pillars. As you see across the screen, this is the intelligence channels. These are the sources of information. Smart alerts, which are targeted email and text alerts. Asset monitoring, which is being able to precisely locate threats around your locations, specifically for your organization. And then dashboards, which provide that visual and shared view of any given situation. So the TX360 platform includes over 2,000 channels. This is open sources from news, social media, RSS feeds, and they've been vetted and maintained by our team of in-house analysts. In addition, our analyst team produces a premium curated global intelligence feed, and that is 100% geolocated, tagged, and categorized. So these sources can be used to create a highly customized alerting service, as well as dashboards that are unique to a given client. Now, smart alerts are where the incoming intelligence becomes actionable for your organization. Smart alerts deliver information according to your unique profiles and settings, monitoring your specific geospatial assets, locations, brands, and they're sent in real time to text and email. These are totally customizable to teams, locations, and they range from global to hyperlocal. And they can be filtered by threat type, severity, and industry. And they can also be set up to target specific sets of recipients. This can be done using keywords as well as category and attribute sets. Our team here, we've been monitoring the COVID-19 outbreak from day one, watching as it spread from around the world and alerting out regarding the numerous and varied closures, travel shutdowns, official guidelines, national, city, and state. Then came along the mask wearing guidelines, social distancing requirements, gathering restrictions, on and on. So in order to do this, we use a variety of open sources. This includes CDC, the US State Department, OSAC, and numerous international sources. And as things reopen, it will be important to track the status of various things going back up the other direction. And as I mentioned earlier, this is somewhat complicated right now because it's going to be happening right in the middle of wildfire, hurricane, tornado season. So that makes it really important to have an ability to monitor all hazards in a single platform. So a couple examples here, alerts on national guidelines. So TX360 can monitor what's happening here in the US, of course, as well as in other countries, and automatically deliver those official alerts when they are issued. Examples here include a national lockdown or reopening notice, can include travel restrictions and social distancing measures. A couple other examples, we look more locally. In the same way, tracking national guidelines, we can look at state-by-state guidelines or even industry-specific reopenings. So TX360 can be used to track at an even more customized level for an organization, depending on requirements, and that may be specific cities, that may be counties, or even your specific company, brand name, keyword. Very, very customizable in that regard. A couple of examples here are travel updates that have been issued. These include US State Department travel alerts and warnings, as well as global travel alerts monitoring risk levels, borders, airline updates, etc. Industry information can also be captured and alerted, and examples of that include plant closures and specific or general strikes and protests. And we see this happening more and more right now in this reopening stage, and the protests can be at specific company locations, or they may be at state and local official locations. So that's something to keep in mind. Talking about customized asset monitoring. So with TX360 Assets feature, you can set up collections of assets, and we call those assets, they're geophysical locations, basically, all the sites that you care about. So you can set those up within TX360 and then automate your alerting based on proximity to those assets. So for a custom alert setup based on asset locations, you can filter based on a radius, a custom polygon, or a route. And this sets the stage for strategically automating that whole alerting process for your organization. So incredible efficiencies of time and information sourcing can be found through this process. Here we have a couple examples of email alerts with asset proximity. So alerts can be set up in proximity to assets, and they'll include the information as you see here. They'll highlight the distance to the nearest assets, as well as a map view. Alerts are automatically then sent out to email and text according to your settings. So if you're fall in the range of this example here, the severe thunderstorm watch, you'll be alerted automatically as this is issued by the NWS. This is a recent example, a tornado warning in the Bronx a week or two ago. And this is an example of an official source feed that we've run through our own machine automation process in order to deliver a rich automated geotagged alert that can then be filtered based on a point or a polygon location, or even more precisely, a set proximity to a client's assets. Similarly, for thunderstorms, we're using official NWS feeds, running that through our machine automation and automating delivery based on client settings. In addition, our analyst team is curating certain alerts with additional information through our global intelligence feed. What we're seeing here is inside the app. This is what we call the Smart Alert queue. Smart Alerts are aggregated inside TX360, where you can then scan through them in a list view and a map view. You'll see represented here a blend of alerts, protest related, as well as a COVID-19 update out of Mexico, to create a complete but customized intel picture for a particular client. Sharing alerts is very easy. Obviously, you can pass along the emails that you receive, but you can also share them directly from the app to other users and other email addresses. So they can be shared from dashboards as well, which we will take a look at next. Dashboards provide visualization and a common operating picture that can be shared within your organization. They offer 24/7 monitoring and focus on your unique global or local threat profiles or crisis scenarios. TX360 provides dashboards that are fully customizable to clients, and this can include asset visualization, shared access for collaboration, aggregation of multiple data types and feeds, for example, a blend of news, social media, and RSS feeds. We offer numerous emergency police fire sources, and then public cameras can also be included for that hyperlocal view of a given physical location. We can also support client custom sources. This dashboard is an example of a COVID-19 monitoring dashboard for the US. This is monitoring official alerts and warnings, as well as news and social media tuned to the topic and related interests. We do have a number of COVID-19 dashboards available on our free dashboard site, and that's via the login information that I shared at the beginning. And if you didn't catch that, I'll also show it on the slide at the end of the demonstration, at the end of this presentation as well. These dashboards are aggregating automated numbers from various sites, bringing it together under a single view, single pane of glass, so to speak. And we're now looking at recovery conditions and tracking economic implications, as well as citywide views for key cities across the US. So I really encourage you to check them out if you haven't yet. And it's a great example of how this information can be pulled together easily and be very usable. So just as it was challenging or near chaos trying to follow the changing guidelines as COVID-19 hit and shut down things across the country, It's also very challenging following the state-by-state regulations now for reopening. So in our TX360 tool, we're gathering the available information about state-by-state guidelines from an official standpoint. And you can see here on the shaded view of state-by-state reopening status, we have the partial reopening, reopening soon, and then the still shut down or restricted. In the same way, we're also pulling from a news and update standpoint. So you can see across the bottom, we can pull from a range of news and official social media stuff, things that are pertinent to the topic and remain helpful to the reader. This dashboard is an example, pulling all of that together into a common operating picture for easy access and ongoing updates. Similarly, it's important to track the larger scale effects, and business and economy is clearly a key one. This dashboard example monitors a variety of channels tuned into that topic. So this includes stock market updates, special events, closures, and reopenings. We're also looking at special topics. So this example is transit disruptions. TX360 can tune into any type of topic, keyword, industry. In monitoring the COVID shutdown, this was a very important aspect to keep track of with all the changing travel and transit disruptions. Going forward, it's going to be reversing that trend. So in summary, here's 3 ways we can use TX360 to help you get a handle on the crisis and recovery going forward. Proactively monitoring official guidelines and alerts on a national and local level. Tracking protests and disruptions that may have personal impact to your business. And then giving access to a set of rich and aggregated information on dashboards to monitor everything that is important to your business. So TX360 is entirely customizable to your preferences and offers a lot of efficiencies and reduction in risk by providing this to across multiple users in your company. Just a note in before we wrap up that I know this has not been the topic of this discussion, but as I alluded to earlier, it is a very important consideration for anyone who's managing security or business continuity right now, and that is entering the natural disaster season. So we've already seen several waves of tornadoes hitting across the U.S. in the midst of this, and some of the challenges of dealing with that in the midst of a lockdown. So we're looking ahead with resources for something as specific as tornadoes, but also the wildfire and hurricane season. Working really hard to help our clients be as prepared as possible for managing these known threats, even among the current landscape. So it's something that we do all the time, but this year it's especially unique and interesting and need to be adapted to. One last example is the wildfire monitoring. So as I mentioned, we are seeing those start to pop up. And for a forward-looking picture on this topic, we would use a common operating picture like this with general incoming information and alert feeds to let you know where things are starting to pop up across the country. Then, of course, for your specific locations, you may have a very hyper-local view around your Northern California region or other key locations that happen to be in wildfire country. So I'd like to wrap all this up. A quick summary of TX360. This is a powerful tool that can help you bring in both the global and hyper-local intelligence that you need to monitor complex situations such as the one we're in today and will be facing for the near future. TX360 is affordable, easy to start up, easy to use, and can bring great efficiencies to the practice of threat monitoring. Many people around the country are Googling for the latest updates, just searching the web day in and day out to stay up to date on the information that they need. TX360 can offer an automated, organized, accessible resource for this, quicker action, collaboration, and increasing intelligence level across your whole organization. So the good news for COVID, all indications are that we're headed into recovery mode. We're working hard on reopening, lots of challenges, but we're also have lots of resources to help make this possible. We've seen the successes and failures around the world already and hope to learn from the best of these and then use the tools and networks that are available to help. So if you're here today at this webinar, that means you're well on your way to thinking about preparing for and navigating through this ever-changing landscape. So with that, if there's any way that we can be of help, even a discussion, assistance to you, we would love to do so. My personal information is here, and you're more than welcome to send me a direct email. In addition, you can check out our dashboards. Again, the example dashboards site, the login information is here, and we would love to hear from you. So with that, thank you for joining us. I think we will head into a quick Q&A. Ariel, do you have any questions coming in for us?
Thanks for leading us through that, Julie. We do have a couple of questions here. The first question that we have is related to news sourcing. So there's so much news related to COVID-19 out there right now. How does this product differ? How does TX360 provide something that I can't read on the news? That's sort of the first question.
Yes, that's a great question. There is kind of an overload of information. And really what TX360 can help with is filtering that down to what is useful, pertinent, and on top of that, timely. So if you need to stay on top of just the official news and reports from state and national guidelines, you can do so. And if you want to get analyst vetted and curated content, you can also get that.
Great. You also mentioned here that a number of states are reopening before being deemed ready. How can you explain this trend?
That's a great question too. I wonder if that might be a good one for you to tackle, Ariel.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I definitely think that there are a number of states that have chosen to take these steps to reopen their economies before meeting all of the experts, in addition to the White House's recommended guidelines. You know, we talked about this recommendation to have a test positive rate of 10% or lower before reopening. But a statistic that I can sort of throw out there is that, you know, just so far in May, at least 15 states have reported an average test positive rate that's higher than 15%, so not quite meeting that guideline. I do think that the easiest way to explain this move towards a reopening, despite these statistics, is due to the cycle that we discussed earlier in the presentation. I think state leaders always have their population in mind, and they want to sort of encourage them that we're moving in a positive and good direction. And the burden of the economic shutdown and the widespread closures is really pushing these policymakers towards reopening in an effort to sort of alleviate the pain that has been felt by so many people as a result of these closures. So I think that, you know, that's probably the best explanation that I can have as to why that might be a move towards the reopening before being deemed ready.
That makes sense.
Another question that we have here is how this product or how TX360 will continue to be relevant after the COVID-19 outbreak passes. You know, we're talking about this recovery. How will that continue to be relevant once this is all behind us?
Yeah, so definitely right now it's one of the most complex situations that we've had to monitor and navigate to date. And I think, you know, we'll be able to get through it, and we will be able to learn from it and be successful through it. I think that, you know, I've already alluded to a number of threats and things that are typical everyday threat monitoring. Wildfires, hurricanes, natural disasters. These are things that you'll be using TX360 for year over year. And we do have clients, you know, that maybe their primary risk is their factories in California in relation to wildfires, or they're in the oil industry in the Southeast or Texas. And TX360 will remain important to monitoring those key physical threats on an ongoing basis.
Definitely. There's no shortage of threats. There's a clear difference, I guess, between some of the large and small companies opening up again. Question here is, do you think that the challenges discussed throughout this webinar apply to businesses of all sizes?
Do you want to take that one, Ariel?
Sure. I think we definitely hear more about the large-scale industrial leaders and how they plan to reopen. That being said, I definitely think that these challenges are applicable across the board for businesses of all sizes. I mean, just like the Nicky USA example, small businesses have been tested equally throughout this time. And I'd even argue that, they are further impacted by challenges due to their smaller budgets or often their smaller physical facilities. But they also do have advantages in that, when we look at the meat processing plants on a large scale, they're often restricted by their machinery, whereas a small scale plant or any business can really have more freedom to move around and provide more space. Additionally, I think that these open and close cycles that are anticipated will come, a little bit more challenging for these smaller businesses. So while I definitely think that in the news we may hear more from these big businesses and how they're reopening, I definitely think that these challenges are going to be necessary to consider across the board, regardless of your business size.
Mm-hmm.
We have one final question here.
Okay.
Much of the discussion was focused around easing of regulations in the United States. But if I have multiple business branches around the world, do your services also tailor to other countries as well?
Yeah, so we cover the globe in terms of information sources. If it is openly available on the web, it can be pulled into TX360, and we did monitor globally as we entered this and through this crisis, all of the changing restrictions and updates from different countries. As we exit, same thing will apply, and we'll be monitoring those same sources for the globe. For a given company, obviously, if you have a distributed footprint like that, it's really important to be able to identify those and track those key sources for your key sites and locations. And so you can do so on a really targeted basis, and you can also do it in a general sense with TX360. So there's a lot of ways to adapt it to your locations, to the information sources that you care about, and to make that really, exceptionally useful for you and your teams globally. It can also be shared across that global team, which is really important too, so that you're all looking at the same information and, validating the risks across the different regions and sites. So we have a footprint of clients that are using it in this way. It's a really key tool for them in monitoring global operations.
Great.
So, good. Well, great. Thanks for all the great questions. Thank you to everybody here that attended, and best of luck in your next stage of reopening. Please feel free to contact us at the information here, and we'll be posting additional webinars on an ongoing basis. So stay tuned and take care. Thanks.